Well, hello and welcome to the very first F1OWC podcast. I'm joined today with reigning Season 8 World Champion Brandon Tanti. Welcome.
Well, hello all, and yes, thank you for that glowing introduction there.
Yes, well, it was quite the achievement. You've joined an exclusive group of drivers, joining myself, Mitchell Collin, Brian Cruz and Peter Dongo. And with me being the exception with more than one title to the name. But nevertheless, you've beaten Brian Cruz, who was the reigning world champion, who also beat Peter Dongo, who was the reigning world champion before him, and Peter beat myself, who was the reigning world champion before him, all driving for Mercedes-AMG Petronas. So, so basically we're looking at doing a bit of podcasting, hopefully, throughout this season, and hopefully as it progresses we can get more and more people on board. And so how do you feel after winning the world title?
Well, I have to say it's a great feeling. You know, I feel a lot more relaxed now, I think, especially going into the next season. I think it didn't come without its troubles, but you know, in the end, I had a great competitor in Brian, also being my teammate, quite a pacey guy. So, you know, I'm just really happy to have gotten and won the championship by, well, what was it?
12 points.
12 points. So, yeah, I'm over the moon.
So how, in terms of having, obviously, you battled for the championship in Season 7, you lost out in your rookie season. How did it feel competing against Brian at Mercedes opposed to racing against him in your debut season?
Well, I think there was a lot more pressure. I think especially being in the same car as Brian. You know, especially at the start of the season when we had that 100% feature race. I mean, I missed out on beating him only by a small margin, but, you know, I think we established some sort of, good relationship at the start, and we tried to push forward for the team. Yeah, despite the fact that we were competing for the championship. But in the end, I just, you know, when it come down to it for the driver's title, I put my head down and did what I had to do, and he did the same. So,
well, it was a good season nonetheless. So obviously, you know, heading into Season 9, being the 9th running of the F1OWC, we're looking at having a full grid at this stage. We've got 19 registered drivers. A few of them have returned from our rival series, the ETF1. One of the names that stick out on that roster of drivers returning is Chris Padajak. Now, I know that throughout your time with us in the F1OWC, you're made the administrator and you're given the rundown on certain events that played out in the past. Not fully living the moment as I have and a few of the other guys have. What are you expecting from the return of Chris Padajak, and how are you looking forward to him returning as a challenger?
Well, to be honest, I think, you know, Chris himself has added to the history of this league, I think, before he spread off and made his own league. But I welcome the competition. I mean, you know, I think this season more than ever is going to be one of the closest competitive seasons that I've been in, despite the fact that I've only been in 2. But, I mean, Chris, along with others, I think, really making me excited to be here and to want to defend my title. I mean, despite the pressure there is to have me having won the championship last season, I think I go into this with a fresh mind. So, looking at Chris, I mean, yeah.
Does it play on your mind that other than myself in season 1 and 2 and 4 and 5, that no other driver's gone on to defend their title. Do you feel that you're going to end up replicating what appears to be a trend within recent champions, or do you feel that you can bring success back to Red Bull, become a double champion?
Well, of course, I'll be doing my best to bring success back, along with yourself. I mean, you and I are both teammates now, and I want to get the best out of that. It was always a partnership that I, desired to be, in this position.
Yeah.
But in terms of your question about defending the title, I guess I'm trying not to think about that too much. I think I'll approach this race by race and just keep my head down and focus on each weekend as it comes. So, I think that's the mindset I've had, over season 8, and I'll continue to do so unless I feel I need to change something.
Well, it seems to be working for you at the moment, so hopefully you've gone from strength to strength from Williams to Mercedes, so hopefully that trend will carry over to Red Bull. You're the lead driver at Red Bull this season.
Well, a question for you. I mean, how does it feel for you to be in that position? I know that you and I have a good relationship, but you feel as though you're the second driver. Do you feel any different?
Well, it's hard to say. Like, I've been around a long time, 9 seasons. Competitive racing is a big stint in the car. Also, hosting the series as well takes its toll, not physically but just mentally. Yes, of course, I dominated season 1 and 2 to a certain degree. Went into the new V6 era as the favourite. I lost out to Mitchell Collin, who claimed his first Drivers' Championship, and the Constructors with the returning Chris Padajak. I then left Red Bull to join Mercedes with Brenton, which on paper seemed the right thing to do at the time.
Well, it seemed like a great partnership. So
it looked very doubtful early on. Brenton was known to be quite the hot-headed driver and found himself front and centre at a lot of silly mistakes and incidents within the paddock. But he sort of composed himself, and we were both contesting for the championship in season 4. I think it was around Monaco. We knew that we were in the position to take the fight to Williams, and we had a team order structure in place because it rained that season, and that we weren't going to put each other at risk for the sake of the team. But obviously, at some point, it was going to. The driver was going to have to put their own interests first before the team if they were going to win the championship, and Brenton did that. He went against the sort of team sort of structure we had, and he ended up winning the Monaco Grand Prix, which is fantastic for him, and we both ended up getting on the podium. It was good points for Mercedes, but just the fashion that he went about it sort of lingered quite lingered within the team towards the end of that season, and eventually I started withholding information from him, and he ended up dropping back off the pace, and ended up winning the championship. And then going back to your original question about being the number 2 driver, so after wrapping up the championship in season 5, I'd broken my hand, and I had to endure a high level of pain to see out the last couple of races of that season. So when season 6 come round, I was really on the back foot, and even till today, there's still a little bit of discomfort there. But struggling at Ferrari, and then joining Peter at Haas, and also to running on realistic engine performance, and knowing that week in, week out, you're not going to be in a position to contest the top 5 or 6 drivers, takes its toll mentally. So me as a host, being able to see that and experience that for myself allowed me to have a better understanding of how a lot of the other drivers feel throughout the season and how they fluctuate and how the mindset changes from race to race to race. Like look at the Belgian Grand Prix. Like I was in a position at Haas there to get on the podium, and on the second last lap, I ended up making a mistake and crashing out, and it shattered me. But returning to Ferrari again, like season 8, it was a very good campaign. We got 15 podium finishes. But Ferrari's first pole at Monza, which is very special for me. But yeah, I think it's very much at a time of my career where I'm ready to step back and obviously let yourself take the lead in the team. All my career, I've been the lead driver, and I just don't think that I'm in a position anymore to be the lead driver on the team. I'm ready to be the support act that a lot of people have been towards me in the past.
Yeah. So, particularly, since you are the most experienced driver, I would say, on this grid, and the longest running driver with the most race starts, I think, do you feel as though you're in the best position in terms of your experience and what you've seen? I think definitely, like you said, you've had a bit of a tough time at Haas, but you felt as though it was something you needed to be able to learn from it and then build yourself up as a driver.
Yeah, well, 100%. Like the season at Haas was really, really character building. Obviously, I started off the season with on a controller and with automatic gears, and as the season progressed and I was falling further and further behind yourself and Brian, who was at Mercedes, and I felt that I needed to change the way I went about Grand Prix racing in terms of looking towards manual gears, and or looking into purchasing a wheel. I ended up doing the manual gears, and it was at the Belgian Grand Prix that I mentioned before that was my first competitive league race on manual gears, and it really opened up my eyes into terms of the differences between automatic and manual gears and how it can change your weekend. But it took a high level of finesse to iron out the gear changes and stuff. But I ended up going further. I got the wheel, manual gears, and I feel I've come out of the season at Haas a stronger person, not only as a driver but as a host. And I think the experience does play a lot into it. I think I've had ever since I've had the broken hand, it's rattled me a bit, and I haven't had that level of competitiveness since then. But going into season 9, I think with the calibre of drivers that we're going to have on the grid, experience is not going to prepare anyone for what we're going to endure in season 9.
I think especially also, you're going back to Red Bull, your roots. I think, it must be something special for you. Particularly, that's where a lot of your glory came from.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you could say we didn't have any broadcasting rights in season 1 and 2, so we're very limited on footage that we actually had recording, which is a little bit upset because, as you say, the majority of my success come from Red Bull. So I would have liked to have that to reflect on, especially with how I am now, and comparing it to other seasons that I've won the championship in. But definitely going back to Red Bull seems the right thing to do at this point. Obviously, season 3 was difficult. We lost both the drivers and constructors title. I left, and I had 2 stints at Mercedes, 2 at Ferrari, and 1 at Haas. So it's kind of like I'm transitioning through my career, and to find myself back at Red Bull, who haven't had any sort of silverware since I was there with Wayne in season 1 and 2. So it'd be good to team up with you. It's going to be the first time that they've had 2 world champions in the one garage, and hopefully that some form of experience and knowledge of some of the drivers returning. I know that you won't, but there are a few of us on the grid that were around in those early days that will have a bit of an insight into how the drivers are going to pan out. But as I said, it's just such an unknown, and yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it's great to hear, especially someone as long running as yourself, to hear of all this experience. But I wanted to backtrack. We were talking about Chris. And,
Yeah.
Especially coming into the season, a lot of other drivers that were in the F1OWC have also, that went to ETF1, have also returned, such as Kane. And,
Yeah. Well, basically, I'll be honest here. The last person I saw would be rostered on the grid would be Chris Padajak. And I'm pretty sure everyone would sit on the fence with me and go, yeah, they're absolutely adamant that they'd never see that name back in Formula One or in the F1OWC. He approached me, and obviously with the events that played out in Season 5, I had to really think long and hard whether or not it was something that I wanted to do.
Well, it drew quite a rift between you guys. So it's quite amazing to see that we found ourselves in this position.
Yeah, well, it's a very unique position to be in. Like, obviously, back in Season 5, which is the first season on the PS4. We started winter testing with 18 drivers, so pretty much the situation we're finding ourselves in heading into Season 9. So we had 8 rookies, and they were pretty much half the grid was rookie drivers. So obviously people coming in were trying to express their opinion, their suggestions, rather than joining and going by the rules set that the administrators had brought forward. Eventually, one led to another, and they become the majority voice within the grid. So obviously they as a group expressed their opinion on certain regulations that should have been changed, and we changed it in winter testing. We went from realistic engine performance, which was used since I took over in at the end of Season 1, and we went to equal performance due to the large number of drivers we had rostered on. And I said, yes, fair enough. And we played out the season, and we got to Monaco when I was approached by, I won't say his name, but I was approached by a driver who expressed his disliking of the realistic engine performance, because as it had been structured in the past, you debut at a middle running to back running car, and you've got to earn your seat at the competitive cars. And this driver had done so, and he moved up to a higher positioning car, but because we'd changed it to equal performance, he'd lost that performance advantage that he'd got from earning that seat. And everyone else that had rocked up as rookie drivers were as good as the next person. Like, there was no difference there. So he'd expressed that. I liked what he was saying, and I opted to revert back to the original standing regulations, which were realistic engine performance. And Solomon, who was racing at Lotus at the time, who was one of the drivers that were in favour of the equal engine performance, won the Monaco Grand Prix on realistic. So he was sort of put in a position of eating his own words there. But it divided the grid nonetheless. And as the season or the rounds continued on, a lot of personnel ended up dropping out. And it wasn't until the end of Season 5 that we'd established that Chris had developed his own series, as you said, the ETF1, and a lot of those nearly all of those drivers that were in favour of the equal performance went over there. And when Season 6 winter testing started, we only had two drivers rostered on the grid. So it was really, it brought the F1OWC to their knees, and it almost destroyed the category. So if looking back then to looking now, it's just amazing that, that we've continued to tick on. But as you said, like with Chris Padajak, taking historical differences aside, it's really fantastic to have him and the other guys, Mitchell and Kane and Trent and all these guys back in the league again. It's a really special moment within the F1OWC history. I just hope that it works out the way that it should on paper and it doesn't implode on itself with people's egos.
Well, it was particularly special to the guys who, like you said, have been there during that era. But also, I think, speaking for myself and maybe others who weren't around but came afterwards, I think, just as an appreciation of the league itself, I come to respect and, being slightly excited for this, being at this time where it's actually happening. So,
yeah, well, credit to the drivers that, joined season 6, 7 and 8. Like, they arrived, especially season 6, arrived in the F1OWC in very difficult times. And if it wasn't for certain drivers, the league probably wouldn't have continued on. Pretty much the start of season 6, you had Brenton, you had myself, and you had Peter Dongo, and Jim Madison, which were the drivers at the time. But it was looking like an Anderson v Dongo season, Mercedes versus Ferrari. And then in the Chinese Grand Prix, along comes Alex Babluis and gets the pole and win on debut in the Chinese Grand Prix and made us all look like chumps. So it was that fresh injection of talent that sort of made Peter, Brenton and myself go, where the hell did this come from? We need to step up our game. And then the league got competitive again. And as it progressed, Alex brought over Brian, and Brian debuted for Force India in the Austrian Grand Prix, which ended up in an early retirement. But God, look at him now. He's a former world champion, and in such a short period of time, actually, you just don't know who the next world champion's going to be.
So you definitely feel as though, as the seasons have gone on, things have got a lot more competitive, which has made it hard for you.
Well, look,
people like yourself and even Peter, I guess.
Yeah, well, look, I think a lot of I'm going to refer to season 1 and 2 drivers as the old generation because it was on the PS3, it was on F1 2013, it was before the V6 engine. So I'm going to refer to us as the old generation. We are old generation drivers. We're legend drivers within the league. It's a very exclusive group, and to have some of us still floating around is good. But I wasn't the original founder of the F1OWC. Trent Fuller was, and it run under Formula One League Australia back then. And then after I had won my championship, he said, "Look, he's willing to give over ownership rights of the league." And then it went through a rebranding phase. And then we've gone through different drivers, but when I took over, I started implementing compulsory practice sessions and stuff like that, and time requirements, minimum requirements for people to get up to speed. And then slowly, as the seasons have been going on, we've been removing a lot of the assists, your pit lane assists and your driving line and all that sort of stuff, so to try and make the drivers push and push and push each season to better themselves. And it's now got to a point where the bar is set so high that the top 5-6 drivers that have raced within the F1OWC in recent seasons are very much on par, to the point where, like myself and Peter, who are a part of that older generation of drivers, are finding it a little bit challenging to keep up with the fresh young talent coming through the season. But, not saying that season 1 and 2 was easy by any chance. It wasn't. But the way that it was structured, it allowed certain drivers like myself to get a sort of advantage by applying myself to solo practice sessions. But once I've implemented that to everyone, obviously, naturally, the pace is going to get quicker.
Yeah. I think over the progression, I think it's been, some of the things that have been implemented have definitely been a good thing. I think especially before we got to, this stage in season 9 with the equal performance, I think we had a few good regulations and driver progression that introduced.
The driver progression was something that was always asked upon, and when it was implemented and the time was taken to implement it to everyone in a structure that worked, 80% of the drivers protested. Or not protested, but just didn't take it for its full value. So obviously, like, the team objectives and the driver progression won't be in play for this upcoming season, which is unfortunate because I like a full immersive sort of or submersive experience of Formula One, and I take the league as serious as real motor racing. To have that level of sort of, if you've got race objectives to meet every round and you've got to beat certain personnel and, to see if you're going to keep your seat or whatever, or progress into a higher team. And that was under realistic engine performance. That's what worked. That's what allowed people to go from McLaren, Honda, who were struggling, and work their way up to Williams or Mercedes or wherever they chose to go.
I think, speaking of that, and in terms of drivers in lower performance cars, shall we speak, I think one driver stands out in particular, and I think you'll agree with me, when he came into the league in season 7, and I think he surprised us all.
I think I know who you're talking about.
And unfortunately, it's sad not to see him, in this lineup for this season.
Yeah.
But talk to us a bit about Tom.
Yeah, Tom Freeman pretty much come out of nowhere. He rocked up in Bahrain, or in testing, and there was quite a few spots left on the grid, but he chose to drive for Mana Marussia, and not just Mana Marussia, a realistic engine performance Mana Marussia. And a lot of at first I had to make sure that was the decision he wanted to make, and that he was aware of the regulations, that it was realistic engine performance, and he chose to stick with it. And he turned some heads in testing, but he was probably a midfield runner at that point. The Australian Grand Prix come round, so mind you, this is the first time that Mana have been on the grid in F1OWC history, and obviously they're not with us anymore, so it's going to be the one and only time in F1OWC history that they took part in this particular season, which is astonishing. But he rocks up in Australia, gets points on debut for Mana, and every race was pretty much history making for Tom and also for Mana. But he endured 2 disqualifications early on in the season, which kind of suggested, he's the sort of run of luck has expired. But then he kind of had this sort of second wind throughout the middle and the end of the season, where he drove the wheels off of that Mana, and I personally don't know how he did it, but he always found himself up in the top group, and he was scoring podiums, which is absolutely astonishing for a team like Mana. He finished the season with 12 podium finishes, including 1 race win at the American Grand Prix.
And I think especially when it came to evaluating how good of performances he was putting in. I think some of us questioned whether or not that he was abiding by the regulations.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Like, we brought him into scrutineering on more than one occasion, purely because of how outrageously he was outperforming this Manor car. Like, he was making some of the people in front-running cars look stupid. And, but the one thing that sticks out more, like, to me more than his sort of race results is his personality as a driver and the way that he went about his business. It was a very intimidating kind of driving style, where...
Oh, I could say, I personally had some run-ins.
Where he'd pretty much...
I think at the end of the day, I think, despite the run-ins that I did have with him, I very much respected him still.
Yeah.
It didn't matter that we disagreed on things. I think at the end of the day, we both raced hard. So
yeah, absolutely. And he was the kind of driver where he puts you in the position that if you committed to that corner, you were going to have a crash with him. And it was then up to you to get out of the way or have the crash. And if you did if you did get out of the way, he knew that he could intimidate you every single time he come up behind you.
Well, one particular race comes to mind, Hockenheim.
Oh,
in season 7.
Yeah.
So I actually had that incident investigated.
I think he took Arthur for an adventure.
2. I think it was a run down to turn 2.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And he just he decided that he would take the racing line despite the fact that I had the inside line.
Sort of a provisional right of way.
Yeah, I felt like we were going inside by side, but he thought that,
he left it up to you to back out.
Yeah, and he, like you said, like he put me in that position.
Yeah,
and I committed, and I was the one to come off second best.
Yeah. He also did the same to Arthur in Hungary. Very, very identical situation to what happened with you in Hockenheim. A lot of the drivers, though, did, fall to the intimidation and got out of his way, and he knew that if he come up behind them later on in the season, that these people would fold. So he's definitely one of the more highly respected drivers, not in terms of, he was aggressive and he was driving erratically, but just one of the more unique personalities. He just went about his business, regardless if he was right or wrong, regardless if he felt the administrative penalties were right or wrong. He still respected the rules, but he still raced. He didn't change his driving style. Just because he got penalised and just because it was slightly frowned upon, he still went about his business. And it's a shame to see him gone. And with that last Sauber spot, as I said, we've got 19 out of 20 drivers set for the upcoming season. I would have really liked to see Tom Freeman in that last spot, because I really think an equal performance, he could be winning championships for Sauber.
Yeah, exactly. But, I think we should get down to some business and talk about the lineup as we speak. At current, some of the drivers that we haven't talked about.
Okay, so obviously, starting from the top, we've obviously got yourself and me at Red Bull Racing Tag Heuer. You arrive in Milton Keynes with 33 podium finishes and 12 race wins, with 11 pole positions. And obviously, you've got you go in as the reigning world champion. Myself, I am on 99 podium finishes.
Well, that's it's got to hurt a little bit.
Well,
you've had a few chances to get the podium.
Well, yes, I have. If I look back over the previous 8 seasons, there are more races than I can count on my hand that I've thrown away podium finishes. But with the competitive lineup that we've got at the moment, I really am going to struggle this season, I think, to get that 100th podium finish, and I may end up finishing my career with 99. I'd hate to think that, but it's the reality that we're facing. So I've got 2,381 points, and the Australian Grand Prix will be my 157th Grand Prix start. So big numbers there.
I mean, 44 first place finishes. I mean, that's speaking for itself. I think.
A lot of those race wins there come in my early season with Red Bull Racing. I clocked up 27 of those race wins at Red Bull. And that was in the first 3 seasons. So it's kind of plateaued out a little bit in terms of, first place success, but the podium count has been up there nonetheless. I've, banked a couple of pole positions, 39 pole positions, and again, like the podium with 99, I think I'm going to struggle to get that 40th pole position.
Well, I think, like I said, the experience you've got, I think definitely you'll be there or thereabouts. Despite the belief that you may have, I think coming into this game, we don't know what to expect. I think the regulations have changed.
Yeah.
And, and like we have spoken before, not particularly in this podcast, but I think you feel as though the regulations might suit you a little bit more. It takes you back to season 1 and 2 a little bit in terms of the increased aerodynamics.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Season 1 and 2 were very strong for me, and they had higher aero levels, and that suited my kind of driving, like as a traditionalist driver. When season 3 come round, all of that aero was taken off, and I struggled, and I got beaten. And it took me quite a bit to get back to that performance, but I don't think I've ever fully returned to that season 1 and 2 dominance. But that's also down to the more competitiveness of the drivers coming into the series. But moving on to Ferrari, as I've said, farewell to Maranello, end of last season, season 8.
Well, yeah, Brian. Well, I think some big news is Brian Cruz has made the switch.
Yeah, well, it was on the cards there for a while. I know that he was sort of eyeing off a spot, but he was trying to see where I was going to move to see if the spot would open up.
I think he had a long-term passion for Ferrari.
And there was also rumours that Peter was going to retire at the end of season 8. So if I'd stayed there, then he probably would have become my teammate. But remaining at Ferrari and going into my 4th season in a Ferrari-powered engine probably wasn't something that I wanted to do. And Ferrari brings a level of success that's expected, and I just didn't think that I was at a point of my career where I could deliver that. So that's why returning to Red Bull on historical value made a little bit more sense. But anyway, Brian Cruz joins Ferrari with 44 podiums and 50 race starts, with 25 of those being race wins.
He's got quite the stunning record, I have to say.
Yeah, well, 50% of his race starts have ended in a first place. So it's quite the batting average.
Well, yeah, the majority of, I think, his time racing, I've spent racing alongside him. So,
yeah.
If anyone was to say that he was a good driver, I will admit that, he will be contesting for, race wins, if not podiums. So.
Yeah, well, it's just interesting, like, going back to when he debuted. He debuted for Force India, which hadn't really had any success, and if I am mistaken, he started getting some podium finishes and started turning some heads, which was astonishing. He ended up finishing that season with 8 podium finishes. He didn't get a win, but prior to that, Force India had only had 1 podium finish in the team's history. And then he turns up and claims 8, and he joined halfway through the season. So it was in the back end of season 6 that he'd actually got that, and that was in a season that Peter was at Mercedes and Peter was dominating. All of the records that I had established in season 1 and 2, Peter destroyed every single one of them, and you know, I was like, wow, I was quite taken back by that. And then Peter and I left for Haas, and Brian had to fill Peter's shoes at Haas. And on the back of that particular season, for a fairly unknown driver, like, there was huge shoes to fill.
Well, yeah, I think, in terms of looking at it as an overall partnership, it's a very strong lineup. There's 2 world champions in both seats. So.
Yeah, well, obviously, Peter Dongo, who was at Ferrari in season 8, he stayed on after announcing that he wouldn't be retiring from the F1OWC. So the Serbian goes into his 8th season within the F1OWC, only missing out on season 3. He's got 99 Grand Prix starts and 57 podium finishes, which puts him up in the top 3 of all-time greatest drivers across all categories.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that a lot of these legacy drivers or season 1 drivers are sticking it around.
I think Peter's notorious. We're known for being the Bahrain king without, before last season.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's a funny story. Like, a lot of people would suggest that Mitchell Collin was the Bahrain king. And if you look at results, yes, they're correct. But whenever the Bahrain Grand Prix come round, Peter Dongo was always the odds-on favourite to get the pole and win the race. And it never happened. It was... you can't explain it. Like, he rocks up, gets the pole, and then either reliability or, other people's negligence, and he finds himself out of a position. But then, obviously, season 8, comes around, and it was pretty much a drag race to the finish line with Brian Cruz, and he ended up winning the Bahrain Grand Prix by 0.02 of a second.
Yeah, it just goes to show that how close it was between those two.
Yeah, and also to point out, if you're looking at history and numbers, like how many pole positions that he'd had at Bahrain to how many he'd converted into wins were none.
Yeah.
But then I think he started 4th in that race, and he ended up winning the race. So obviously, it just goes to show that pole position isn't always important. But yeah, fantastic for him to finally get that, and I'm sure he's
Well, I don't think he actually would have thought that he would win the race.
No, and I think that's what made the difference. I think knowing that he was in 4th and that mentally he's not in a position to win the race, so he didn't go looking for the win. He let the win come to him.
Yeah, I think, taking that relaxed attitude really helped him out a bit. I think, there was a little bit of luck involved.
Yeah.
Myself in particular had an incident on the first lap.
Yeah, I think so. Did I. I got mad contact with Luke Snape.
And in terms of Brian, I think he had some trouble throughout the race as well.
Yeah. I think that's where I almost snatched the pole position off him, and almost broke my pole record, or my pole drought, which I think was like 86 races or something like that.
Yeah. Just goes to show that experience is always there. So.
Yeah, so it leads on to our next driver, Luke Snape. Now, obviously, Mercedes-AMG Petronas took quite the blow in the off-season between your championship-winning season, losing both yourself and Brian Cruz as championship-winning drivers.
From the past 2 seasons.
Yeah, well, that's it. And even before that, like, it's not the first time that Mercedes have found themselves in this situation. Remember, me and Brenton rocked up. Mercedes had a constructors in the hands of Peter and Scott, but they had no driver silverware. And then me and Brenton, we won both, backed it up again in season 5, and that brought a sort of level of success. Then Peter, because obviously me and Brenton left Mercedes to go to Ferrari, and it was replaced by Peter. Now, after the season that we'd had, there was a lot of expectation there, and Peter delivered, but then he left again, and then Brian came in, who was another sort of unknown driver, and then he delivered and he got the success. And again with you, like, you had a good season in Williams, but there was no guarantee it was going to happen again at Mercedes, and it did. And, you know, Mercedes find themselves in a unique position where they've had 5 consecutive drivers' championships, and I think it was 4 out of 5 previous constructors.
Yeah, well, I think moving into the era of equal performance, could we see the downfall of Mercedes?
Well, it's definitely looking that way. I think, you know, credit to Luke Snape, like, he raced with McLaren and I believe Williams, at the top of my head, under realistic performance. And, you know, but he arrives with only 2 podium finishes and 24 race starts. And the 2 podiums that he had were 2 third places. So I think in terms of, you know, like, when I turned up at Mercedes, I'd already had 2 drivers' championships. Peter rocked up with, you know, 4 seasons of experience and multiple race wins and a constructor title. You know, I think the big unknown was Brian. But then even like you, when you turned up there, you at least had a second place in the drivers and constructors at Williams the season before.
Yeah, well, definitely. And going into the season with Mercedes, there was, you know, there was no guarantees that I could get the job done.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
like I said before, coming up against, you know, the reigning champion at that time, Brian Cruz.
Yeah.
You know, the task was ahead of me. I had to do what I could to overturn, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the efforts that he was putting in. You know, he didn't make it easy for me, despite being my teammate.
No.
And I think you know, in terms of being at Mercedes, I think there is a level of pressure that comes along with
the name of the
getting
team.
the seat.
Yeah. Well, that's what it was like, you know, and that was the whole thought process behind the realistic engine performance and having that development program, was to enable drivers to work their way to the top. So when they were at the top teams, they were delivering. But I think we've got Lindsay Hobbs, who's also a fairly new driver, joining Luke at Mercedes. So that's 2 drivers with podium finishes you could count on one hand. You know, which is a worrying point for Mercedes if they're going to, you know, as you said, like, this era of their dominance is looking like it's going to come to an end in season 9.
Yeah, but I think, you know, in terms of Lindsay in particular, you know, racing alongside him, I think he's shown a lot of promise.
Yeah.
I think he will bring something independent within himself to the team. You know, something that maybe even myself or Brian hasn't brought before.
Yeah, well, he's got a second place finish, which is 1 higher than his teammate Luke Snape. So it'd be very interesting to see how those 2 progress. No, not only with the pressure of Mercedes, but, you know, the challenge that's been laid before them. So we'll move on. Obviously, we find ourselves at Williams and Chris Padajak.
Chris. I think Chris Padajak in particular has a history of, well, even before he left to form his own league, ETF1, he was a Williams driver.
Yeah, he was. He stayed true to the Williams brand, yeah.
Yeah, and he's been welcomed back at Williams. And I'm sure Williams are very happy to have an experienced driver like himself.
Well, Williams haven't had any success since the partnership of Season 3.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think especially that I've been at Williams myself, and being my first season, I think it was a great season to be at that team. Particularly, because it is your rookie season, and you don't, there is not as much pressure as being at one of the top teams.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what helped me a little bit being there. But I think it's different compared to in Chris's case. I think he's enjoyed some success there.
Yeah.
I mean, he scored a fair amount of points.
Yeah.
Is he the top point scorer at Williams?
Let's have a look here in the archive. No, he is tied first. Mitchell Collin is top point scorer at Williams with 567 points, and Chris Patterjack is a close second on 502 points. So this season, potentially, Chris Patterjack will move himself into the all-time point scorer for Williams Martini Racing.
Yeah, definitely.
But he sits on 502 career points with 8 Grand Prix wins and 12 pole positions, and has 42 race starts. So he's 8 rounds off hitting the half century, which he'll most likely hit early on in season 9.
Yeah, well, moving forward, I think a driver that we don't know too much about, which has come and will be having his rookie season this season at the F1OWC, is Jonathan Formica.
Yeah, well, not mistaking him for any relative to Paul Formica. But yeah, he's come from fairly uncharted sort of open wheel racing. He's come up through the academy, and he's signed for Williams Martini Racing for season 9 alongside Chris Patterjack. Now, there's not really much more we can add to the presence of Formica. That I can just say that he's going to have a very difficult season with the level of competitive drivers that we have on the grid. Like, he could very find himself in a position where he's overwhelmed by everything that goes on, but not only the racing, but just the off-track sort of environment can at times become overwhelming.
Yeah, well, I think that's something that all rookies face.
Yeah.
And particularly in his case, like you said, we don't know too much about this guy, but I'm sure that, depending on his results, he will be doing the talking through that. So, he may as well be a surprise to us, like many in the past.
Yeah, okay, so
we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, so Daniel Aspo returns to Force India for his second stint at the team.
Yeah, and he has, he also has raced in a league that he runs himself.
Yeah, it's good to see this kind of, tri-series of drivers and, personnel congregating to one online world championship. It promotes well for the spectators. Yeah,
and I think he had a fairly decent start to the season 8.
Yeah.
He had I think he had some decent results. I think he had a few unlucky moments.
I think he was plagued with a lot of bad luck. He does only have the one podium position, despite consistent sort of front-running pace that the bad luck striked and took him out of that position. But yeah, so
I can remember one particular case of bad luck is Russia.
Oh, yes.
And I think he'll be remembering that as he comes back to that track.
Yeah. I don't think Russia sits well with most people.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see if it comes back to haunt him. But
I quite like Russia. It's very good on tyre wear.
Yeah. I enjoyed the track itself in terms of the layout. I mean, it is a quite flat track.
Yeah, well, I was robbed of a podium finish in season 7 when I was with Haas. Due to a mistake of my own, I'm not pointing any fingers. But yeah, I ended up crashing out on the first lap, which was unfortunate. But from a spectator's point of view, it was a fantastic race to watch. But from an administrator's point of view, it was terrible because there were so many incidents that I had to review and look over at the time.
Oh, I think I was involved in a few of them.
Well,
not
yes.
particularly causing them.
Well,
but
we'll let you be the judge of
that. don't go there.
So, Force India, and Jim Madison also makes his Force India return. He actually...
A seasoned veteran, yeah.
Yeah, season 1 veteran, and it's his third stint at Force India, I believe.
You know, 2 podiums. He scored a total of 239 points.
Yeah, and his last podium finish was at the inaugural Mexican Grand Prix for Force India in season 5, where 3/4 of the grid got disqualified for track limit impeding. So, you know, Jim's the kind of guy where he'll turn up, he'll be completely off the pace for the majority of it, but then when there's a small chance of success, he's first in line to grab that ticket.
Yeah, definitely. You know, the way I know Jim, like you know, in terms of outside the car,
great guy.
Great bloke.
Yeah, his laugh is infectious. You just cannot get enough of Jim.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I think.
But he's also our oldest driver.
You and him have an inside joke about some of his mistakes.
I'll let you in on one of them, which I don't know if we can say it here, but you know, basically back forget when it was, it was in the early days, and we were at Canada, and basically I come out of the last corner and I spun out, right, and I ruined the time that I needed to I think top the session or something like that. And then I was spewing, and I said, you know, I opened up the rear too early, referring to the DRS. But you know, Jim took my words and ran with them, and it became the joke of the town for seasons to come.
Yeah.
So, but I also recall it was season 5 Australian Grand Prix practice, right? This is the best. I unfortunately dropped out of the session because season 5 on F1 2015 was a bit temperamental. So I joined back and I was watching as a spectator. And when I joined, I watched Jim trundling down the pit lane, you know, to go back out on track. And I thought, yeah, you know, at the time, looking at 2014 to 15, the graphics were fantastic, you know, in comparison to the 2 games. So I was admiring Jim and his car. And he comes out of the pit lane, and then like the camera angle changes where it's looking up the main straight, like when they start the race. And basically, he didn't turn onto the track, and he was out onto the grass, and then all of a sudden he'd realised he was going to hit the wall and dropped the left hand and swung the car to the left. And he just flew straight across the track and hit the wall on the other side of the track, and then come to a halt in the gravel trap at the end of the straight. It was, oh man, was one back.
I'm sure a few explicit words were said.
Oh, he couldn't believe it. I was crying with laughter, and I just happened to have it recorded. So, but yeah, that's Jim in a nutshell. Great guy. But we'll move on to Toro Rosso, and Steve Shadlow has made the move after a brief stint at Red Bull Racing last season.
Well, I think he really appreciated the time he had there. I think, you know, after a few events that happened, he managed to get the seat. And he really, I think, you know, in terms of a driver's progression, I think he's come a long way since his debut.
Yeah, well, in testing, he was quite a fair way off the pace, and like a lot of rookies have done in the past that have rocked up in testing and been on the pace. Like, it's one thing to race career mode and be successful in the career mode because you can predict the way that the drivers are going to be. You're going to put the AI in a position and they're going to move out of the way majority of the time. With the competitive online racing, the pace is consistently higher. It's like playing online on FIFA or online on Call of Duty. They're never the same in the career mode. And I think a lot of newer drivers that join the league or A League for the first time find themselves on the back foot with the pace. And then it's down to their own personal motivation to knuckle down and put in that additional time that's needed to get them up to that pace. And once they're there, they're consistently running.
Yeah, well, I think in particular, I'm sure he's glad to be at Toro Rosso with that wonderful livery.
Yeah, well, it's definitely one of the more better-looking ones.
Through the majority of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. His teammate, Robert Janowski, is one of the first drivers to branch over from ETF1 in pursuit of Chris Padajak.
Well, I think, there'd be a lot of people curious to see his progress and what he can do, especially coming from another league, particularly Chris's league. A lot of people will be eager, particularly the people who have been in the league, in F1OWC over the past few seasons.
Yeah.
Be interested to see the comparisons drawn between, the running of performance of both leagues and how that's going to match up.
Yeah, well, he's our second residence from Perth, alongside Solomon Fakir from Season 5. So it'll be interesting to see how the time difference goes this season with him, because I know it was a bit temperamental with Solomon back then in terms of, when we could start the session, because obviously we're on the East Coast, so when we start the session to his time zone, so we had to race ours a little bit later to cater for him. So, look, I wish him all the best, and I hope he does deliver. I'm not too sure what he was like in ETF1, but I'm sure he'll be looking to establish himself fairly early on.
No, definitely. I'm sure he'll be there, in Australia Race 1 there to make a mark. So,
yeah.
Especially with the calibre of drivers we have, I'm sure he'll be there ready to make a point.
Yeah.
Moving on.
So we've got Renault. And Kane Hoggard. Well, all I can say about Kane is he's very ambitious. But he joined. Now, it's kind of a sort of... I don't know what kind of story you would call it, but it wasn't a good one. And basically, after the events happened with Chris and in Season 5, and a lot of those drivers began leaving, Kane joined the Facebook page of the league and wanted to take part. And I said, okay, look, we'll do your induction test in the Belgian Grand Prix in practice, and you can take part in the race, providing that you pass. And Kane is the type of person where he knows he's going to win before he's won it.
Well, he has that. I've heard that he definitely has that mentality.
Yeah. So, but it was also highlighted by the fact that he got a front row start in the Belgian Grand Prix on debut for Williams, replacing Chris. So, it was a good qualifying effort for him, to say the least. But then it was the lack of league running. Competitive league running that sort of was his undoing, where on the first lap, full tank of fuel, going down to a Rouge, tried to take it flat, understeered wide, and hit the barrier, and his race and his debut was over before it started.
Yeah.
And then again, the same thing. It happened the following week where he got the front row start at Monza, and then something happened, and then he didn't end up getting any championship points until Singapore, where I think the sort of made his sort of objectives a little bit more realistic, like just finishing the race and getting the points. Now, he did make the move to Red Bull the following season after a fairly good campaign at Williams. And then, like in traditional Australian Grand Prix fashion, he got the pole position and he won the race. every single winner of the Australian Grand Prix have come from pole position.
Well, it seems like that's the only race win he has to his name.
It is the only one that he has, and which highlights the sheer strangeness of the Australian Grand Prix. That it doesn't matter who you are or how much experience you've got. If you get pole at Australia, you're going to win the race.
Yeah, I think that was demonstrated, particularly in my experience last season.
Yeah.
I was so close, and you've had that moment too.
I have.
You yourself and Chris Patterjack.
Yeah.
Chasing him down.
Yeah,
on the final lap.
Chris ran out of fuel in season 4. Like, I'd done 2,000 practice laps around Australia heading into that race, and I was on rails. The guy ran out of fuel on the last lap of the race and still finished ahead of me because he was on pole. It just does not matter. I think
it just seems like it's meant to be.
Yeah, it's just meant to be. Like, I think it was when Andrew Rumsey won it. He dropped back to like 7th in the race at one point, and still won the race. Like, it's crap.
You can't script it.
No, you can't. You cannot. And to have 8 consecutive winners from pole, I could be rambling on it for hours. But, going back to Kane, he ended up following Chris to the ETF1, which was a little bit of a sort of, kick in the guts, because he was the guy that come in to replace Chris, and then he ended up following and joining Chris. So, I was, we're all a little bit filthy on that, but, regardless, the past has happened, and we're in a unique position now within the F1OWC that these people are coming back.
Before we move on, I would like to just say a particular element that I think will come true a lot this season, and like we spoke about in past seasons, and like we spoke about, Tom, is the personalities within this league. Not only their driving ability, but also who they embody themselves to be.
Yeah, well,
how they portray themselves.
Like, we've got a lot of personalities and we've got a lot of nationalities. And some people have higher egos than others, and, it's fluctuated up and down over the past. There was a few points in our history where conflict was brought up between drivers, with Goran and Peter at Monaco, and, we don't accept that kind of, verbal abuse on the radio. That's not the kind of image that we want to present. We hit the nail on the head with that straight away, and we haven't had a problem since then, because it's moderated. If you let people have too much rope, they're going to run with it, and we just, if we're trying to promote to get new people on board, we don't want that kind of behaviour filtering out to the public.
I think we're looking for the right type of people.
Yeah.
I think the personality that comes along with it is a bonus. With a lot of these guys, I think, even Brian himself has a very unique personality. Everyone on the grid has their own way of going about things.
Yeah.
And I think, in the end, we're all there to just enjoy and have a laugh at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Despite, the history that has gone on.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's definitely good to see Kane back in the number 2017, or number 27 Renault, should I say.
Yeah.
But yeah, he'll be partnering alongside league founder Trent Fuller.
And like they call him,
the Lord.
The Lord.
Yep.
Yes.
Because he is the giver of life within the league. And the bearer of all knowledge. He sort of established himself earlier on. It was actually a title that was given by Pete, because pretty much if you wanted to know any stat from Formula One, from any era he would know it without Wikipedia or Google. Like it was,
he would be the go-to man.
yeah, and
I think I've tested him out myself.
yeah. Well, when we were in Melbourne for the Australian Grand Prix, and we had a question and we all sent it to him, and not only did he say the driver, he said the driver, the car, and where that person finished in the race. You know, like, it's mental. Like, you just can't explain it. But, so he's the league founder, but he's also returning from ETF1. So he did branch over there as a driver for, I think, 2 seasons.
Well, he had a brief stint at when he was racing in both leagues at the same time.
Yes, but obviously I think his season results reflected that because he was running in 2 series and he wasn't attending 100% of both. So,
well, definitely. Well, I can say that he was my teammate in season 7.
Yeah.
And definitely I think my constructors bid took a big hit.
Well, I feel that Williams could have won the Constructors if he'd been there the whole time, which would have made the first silverware since season 3, which would have been 4 seasons at the time. And yet Williams now, it's been 6 seasons since their last, bid for any of the titles, the constructor or the drivers.
Well, I think Renault as a whole with Kane and Trent, I think, the question is, could we see some valuable points being banked by both?
Well, if we're talking about banked points, Trent Fuller, he's got 714 points.
A majority of those at Ferrari.
At Ferrari, yeah. Like, it's just amazing at how many points that he's actually accumulated. And also too. Now I don't have the exact figure on it, but I did work it out in the off season that he's actually the all-time leading point scorer for points scored outside the podium.
Oh, that's
substantially ahead of myself. Like, the majority of my points have come from podium finishes, and likewise with Pete and yourself and Brian and everyone else. But in terms of points earned outside of the podium placings, that he is, top of the pecking order by, I think, 300-400 points.
Yeah.
So in terms of, championship winning material, do I think he can do it? No, because I think his performances fluctuate too much. But I think for a constructor winner, if he's there full time, I think he's consistent to bring in the points.
Yeah, definitely. I think he will be definitely solid, alongside Kane. I think Kane he'll be coming into this season with something to prove.
Yeah. So McLaren Honda and Liam.
Yeah, I think a couple of last minute signings.
Yeah, well, it's good to see McLaren. Well, both McLarens back on the grid, but at the hands of Liam and Arthur.
Yeah.
Both making their return after a brief retirement at the start of season 8.
Yeah. I think surrounding Arthur's retirement, I think he was having a few issues in regards to synchronization with other people's internet.
Yeah.
I think it was more of a technical problem.
Yeah, a bit of reliability there.
Yeah. And with Liam, I think, I think he's just found that spark again to come back to the league.
Yeah, well,
after
Arthur,
his disappearance.
Yeah, well, Arthur and Liam, have known each other for quite a long time, since before 2012. So they're good friends off track. So it's good to see them both under the same roof, and like I said, it's good to see McLaren Honda back on the grid. And hopefully, with the 2 drivers that they've got now, both drivers have seen success within the F1OWC in terms of podium place finishes. So I really hope that these 2 drivers can bring McLaren back to the top divisions of F1OWC.
Yeah, well, Liam in particular, I think, is quite a quick driver, and I think he's proved that
Yeah.
over the time that he has been racing.
Well, he was with the realistic performance to Renault in season 7, so I think he was a little bit withheld because of that the performance deficit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're moving to Haas Formula One team.
Yeah. Well, announcing our final championship winner.
Yeah, Mitchell Collin.
On the grid. Mitchell.
So I didn't think that I'd see him back on the grid either, along with Chris Padajak. But I will have to say, all 5 championship winners are on the grid this season for the first time in the league's history.
Yeah, and I think it does a solid for the league in terms of publicity.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and to know that, especially in those earlier seasons where I was the only champion, and then Mitchell was there, and then Mitchell left, and then I was the only champion again. But now we've got this sort of assorted mixture of champions, and they drive in different styles, and what took them to get their championship wins were different to each other, and it's good to see those different sort of championship winning personalities all on the grid.
Yeah, well, he has quite a stunning record. 30 Grand Prix starts, 25 podiums.
Yeah, well, he early on in his career, his race to podium average was fluctuating around, within 2 points of each other. It was nearly the perfect record. It was like 98% race to podium finish. He had a little bit of a stint at Toro Rosso in season 5, and that definitely hurt his performance because, like Arthur, he had that synchronization error or problem, and he ended up having to withdraw. So a lot of those sort of that missing 5 podium finishes come from Toro Rosso.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people will be eager to see Mitchell in action because myself in particular haven't raced alongside the man.
Yeah, well, Mitchell, like Kane, brings his fair share of just I'm trying.
We don't want to get too controversial.
I'm trying to think of the right word. Let's just say colourful driving style, on and off the track. All right.
I see. Would we say he's very ambitious?
He's very ambitious. But he won the season 3 World Championship.
Yeah, I think that in particular,
and that is never
goes
given
to show his record.
Yeah. So, it'll be interesting to see how he goes on track this season. I just really hope he comes back with the right mindset and focus, and it'll be good to see him competing alongside Peter Dongo because of their past sort of,
Well, I think his teammate in particular has been lining up a lot of interest.
Yeah, Liam Jensen.
ETF1.
Is another one of the drivers that have branched over from ETF1 to partner alongside Mitchell Collin. Joining Haas, and just briefly going back to Mitchell being a champion and joining Haas, other than these 2 drivers, myself and Peter are the only championship winning drivers to drive for Haas. With now Mitchell going there, 3 out of the 4 drivers were championship-winning drivers. So it just seems to be the place to go for championship-winning drivers at some point in their career.
Yeah, well, I think Haas would be very happy to welcome, like they did with yourself and Peter.
Yeah, it definitely bodes well. And I think with the equal performance regulations, naturally, these guys are going to be able to extract more out of the car compared to what myself and Peter did, keeping in mind it's going to be the 2017 version of the car and not the 2016 version. The 2016 version was, I'll admit, on realistic performance was quite a handful, and at times was very unpleasant. And to quote Grosjean, I had tremendous problems with my brakes, but I'm not gonna repeat myself every single round, which I did at the time.
Let's not go down that path. Yeah.
So I think from what I can see from real Formula One, I feel that the 2017 Haas is a bit more user friendly, and with equal performance, I think these guys will. I think they're capable of getting podium finishes.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one of the stronger, partnerships on the grid.
Yeah.
In
terms of new partnerships.
I'm sure if they can develop some good chemistry between them.
Well, they know each other off track. So
yeah, well,
they do a bit of karting and stuff like that competitively.
Yeah.
So we're moving on to our 19th and final driver here, Matt Allison, who joins Sauber. Now, Sauber have been absent since season 2 when Jim raced for them, who replaced Peter from season 1. So it's been quite a long time between drinks for Sauber, so it's good to see them back on the grid. But there was also a bit of limbo of who they were actually going to be signing for season 9, because originally Steve Shadlow and Luke Snape were rostered to go to Sauber.
Yeah. There's a lot of talks, and it almost looked like a done deal.
Yeah, well, as far as I was concerned, that I thought, it was already pen to paper. But when the rest of the grid started shaping up, and obviously if you reflect the Sauber to the real Sauber in Formula One, obviously we've got equal performance, but it's not really sort of an appealing team to want to join. But unfortunately for Matt Allison, Sauber is where it's at the moment, and he's filled that place on the grid. So I really hope that he can bring some kind of level of success back to Sauber that's been missing since season 1 and 2. Even taking to the grid is a milestone in its own right.
Well, yeah, I'd be definitely excited to see when he has a couple of points finishes, which I'm sure he will. I'm sure he will be in the points. It's just a matter of where.
Yeah.
And, how much composure he has amongst the rest of the field.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately, he doesn't have a teammate.
No.
But there's nothing stopping from now until testing him gaining one.
No, well, look, I don't think a driver necessarily needs a teammate. Like, if you look back at Tom Freeman, Manor, he was there on his own.
Well, he could be the next Tom Friedman.
Yeah.
So anything is possible.
Well, you just don't know.
We've been shocked time and time again.
Yeah.
And you've been shocked a lot more than I have.
Yeah.
And you've seen a lot of things over the league's history, and I think you're the perfect person to sit here and say that anything is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like Peter Donko's win at Bahrain. No one saw that coming.
No. Well, yeah. So that's the 19 drivers of Season 9. We've broken down and gone through a lot of the drivers there. But just before we begin wrapping what we're doing here in the first podcast, because we want to save a little bit in the cabinet for next time, if if the podcast takes off and we can choose to do another one.
Well, it would be brilliant to bring a few guests along.
Yeah, like having other people on and talking and reflecting.
Depending on the support we have.
Yeah.
We have a few in mind.
Well, hopefully, this kicks things off and we can do it, post-race.
We'd definitely like to bring along Brian Cruz.
Yeah, well, champion in his own right. Yeah.
Yeah, my teammate in Season 8.
Yeah.
Also, possibly some of the guys from ETF1.
That'd be interesting conversation, to say the least.
Well, we will not know until we approach that.
Yeah.
So.
But just before we go, I want to reflect a little bit on your career, and I'll do the same with mine. What is your worst F1OWC moment in your career so far? Your worst?
No, I can pick that straight away.
Yeah.
Actually, it's now that I come to think of it, there's 2 times.
Yep.
They were both DNFs.
Mm.
I think they were my only DNFs.
Mm.
And they were both caused by my own fault.
Yeah, which is never nice.
Yeah, season 7 Canada.
Oh, yes. I think I was running behind you at the time.
Yeah, I was going through the fast chicane
before the
through
hairpin.
sector 2. Yeah, and it just got a bit unsettled on the curb coming out of the chicane. And
you were experimenting with medium traction control at the time, weren't you?
I was. I had medium traction on since the start of the season, and I believed that was something that would best benefit me. I thought that was the quickest I could get out of the car, and unfortunately it come to bite me in the end. And obviously I made the change after that.
Well, the one thing that I found with F1 2016 and no traction control or medium traction control is that the cars were very easy to light up the rears and rotate, and I just felt that, yes, okay, on paper it's the quickest way to go racing, but in terms of competitive league racing, it was just too unpredictable, and you needed to put hours and hours and seasons of experience under your belt to be able to confidently go out there and attack. And I think that's the difference Tom had.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, I think it's something you have to evaluate from a whole. One thing doesn't suit the next person. You have to go with what is the best but the most consistent in your abilities.
Yeah.
And, of course, I believed in myself that I could race with no traction, but at the same time, I felt, analysing things that when it got to hairy moments, all it takes is one slip, especially on 2016 with the cars feeling so light and especially at the rear. Like the cars felt very
floaty. Loose. Yeah, like you're on ice.
Yeah, and it was just something that I could never be comfortable with. So
no, not to run week in, week out. But what was your other bad moment that you were going to mention?
yeah. Well, you like coming back to that, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Well, the other moment is season 8, Spa.
Yes. Was that the one where you had almost a whole lap lead?
Yeah.
And then you threw it away on your own?
Yeah, well, we're coming towards the end of the race, and I think
it was like this penultimate lap or something like that.
Yeah, it was. There was barely any time left in the race.
Yeah,
and it's going up a Rouge,
and it was raining. It was heavy rain.
Yeah, it was raining. Oh, yeah, it was a wet track. I think I'm not too sure if it was wets or interconditions. I think
I was on wets.
I think I changed to inters.
Yeah,
I think I was on inters and. Because I decided to make that change.
Yeah.
Team, and belling through a Rouge, and it just got on the curb, and I had that much understeer. I just kept going straight into the wall.
The inters wouldn't have helped.
No, well, the inters didn't help. I may as well, chuck some cardboard boxes on each side of the car.
And okay, so you crashed out with pretty much a whole lap lead, but who won that race? I can't remember who won that race. It was me.
Well,
yes.
Safe to say it's the bloke who likes to brag.
Yeah, well, come on, mate. Yeah, well, same question to myself about my worst moment in F1OWC history takes me back to the final round of season 1. Right, so this is a long time ago, and a few people that I've come across, remember little bits, but not, I remember this moment like it happened yesterday. I was leading the race, and it was raining, right, and at Brazil, and I pitted, and Scott Butler inherited the lead, and I had, I think it was about 8 laps or so to close in about a 30-second gap to him, and but he chose not to pit, and I was pushing, and I was closing it down, and by the time now, just mind you, at this point, the only time, because I had a bit of unreliability throughout season 1, and the only time that I'd finished the race, I'd won the race. So I had 11 classifications as such, and 11 race wins, right? So I'd rocked up at Abu Dhabi, Brazil, and I was contesting the championship with my teammate, right? But my teammate had retired early in the race. So all I had to do was finish the race. I didn't even have to finish the race, and I would have won the championship. I already had the championship won, right?
But we got a bit greedy, didn't we?
I did, all right? And and that's something that I've developed on over the seasons, especially as I go back to that time at Haas, was something that I had to work on as a driver. That, sometimes I can't always be the winner. And, driving Haas taught me that. And so anyway, I'd closed in on the back of Scott, and we're going through you'd call it the final corner before the long main straight. And he sort of understeered sort of wide. I saw the gap, and I was catching him 4 seconds a lap, and because by this time his tyres had gone and mine were at optimal level for the conditions. And I saw the gap, and I thought, you beauty, threw it down the inside. And what I should have done, and I look back at it now, and this is what eats me the most, that I should have just withheld, let him go through, and then I would have got him on the run to the line because I had that traction grip and advantage.
You would have had, was there DRS?
No, there wasn't, because it was still wet conditions. But, if I'd sort of held it back a little bit going through that corner, I would have got
the advantage.
Yeah, I would have had the advantage going down that straight, and I would have won the race, and he would have come second, and that would have been the end of the story. But I didn't, and I didn't think about that. I just had my own sort of blinded by greed moment, and just assumed that every time I finish a race, I win the race. And I ended up making contact with him, and we both ended up spinning off the track. And Jake McGivern, who I think was driving for Lotus at the time, won the race. Scott ended up regathering himself and coming second. And Brenton finished third. So I ended up finishing off the podium in fourth, right? Which was sort of, that's what I deserved kind of moment. But Scott Butler never found himself in a position of winning a race again. And that's what eats me, is that, for someone as good as him, was in a position to win his first race, and
never got the chance to do so again.
And my own greed robbed him of that. Like, I could have just stayed in second and said, you know what, mate, I've already won the championship, you can have it.
Yeah. I think, moments like this define...
Well, it shapes who you are, definitely, moving forward.
Exactly. And, I think since we've talked about some of our worst moments, I think, we'll keep it quick, but, if you, I'm sure you have a long list of great moments that you have, but if you had to list one right now, what would it be?
Oh, well, I'd really have to break them down and have a look, but in terms of best moment...
I will pick a season.
Okay,
and then
pick a season.
You pick a... All right. Let's say season 4.
Oh. Okay.
I'm sure I can think of... I think that was season 4. We set that lap. Was it the Monaco lap?
Well, yeah. It's funny that you say the Monaco lap, because when you said season 4, the first thing that come to mind was Brenton going against team orders. So I was a little bit blinded by the negative side of that. But going to qualifying, it was the opposite story. Obviously, it was a heavy rain scenario. I think I was in third or second place. And I was on my flying lap, right? And by this time, I'd nailed the first part of the section. I was going through the tunnel, and I saw that Chris Padderjack topped the session.
Yeah.
All right, and I thought, oh, okay. Because with the sort of history that I'd had at Monaco, I had a pretty terrible season 3 Monaco, and I was really looking to sort of get back onto form. And so I had that mid-lap pop up saying that he's gone quicker. So I thought, what I'd already done in that first half a lap, I had to really kind of drill in and try and get more so I could close the gap. And I nailed, the Novel chicane and to back, threw it in there, and I ended up getting the pole position. But the whole lap was pretty much wheel spin and over revving just because of the water. Obviously, back then I think I was running sort of assisted automatic. So it was automatic, but I was shifting up and down.
And mind you, guys can check that out on the F1OWC YouTube channel.
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite an array of playlists there of different seasons and different moments. Some better than others. And
there's a wealth of videos on there.
Absolute wealth.
Just check that out, and you'll find it from many seasons.
Exactly
what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, pretty much, that's pretty much going to wrap up our first podcast of the F1OWC. Hopefully, we can keep it a tradition. And I'd just like to thank reigning world champion Brandon Tanti and future teammate for joining me today.
Yeah, the pleasure is all mine.
Yeah.
To sit here with you, particularly as not only as a long-standing driver, but as the admin of this league, it's just it is an honour to be here.
Yeah. Look, I think I can speak on your behalf as well. I could seriously ramble on about the league for hours and hours, but I'll tell you something.
You and I have.
I'll tell you something though. If we end up making a second podcast, I'm bringing a drink to the table because I've got quite the dry mouth. So we learn from our mistakes. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you again in the second podcast.
Well, you guys, next time, if you're going to sit around for a podcast like this, make sure you guys bring your drinks too.
Keep hydrated and eat healthy. It's a terrible suggestion. None of us are going to do that. We like takeout. For the final time from the F1OWC, see you later.